Jim Candy Part 3, Chapter 2. Saturday night was the state 4A title game. Drew wasn't crazy about going. I heard him and Deshawn complaining that they were going to miss some movie with Natalie Vick and her friends, but I wanted to see the game. My dad always said that you couldn't be the best until you knew what the best looked like. Okay, is that true? And Pasco was the best. Early in the season, they'd beaten Long Beach Poly, a powerhouse team from California, had gone undefeated through their league, and had defeated Foothill 20-16 the week before. Pasco had a running back named Ivan Leander, who averaged 10 yards every time he touched the ball. I was the first player in Shills Hole High parking lot, but I wasn't there long before Middleton and Jones showed up, and then a bunch of other guys came. The last two were Drew and Deshawn. We were expecting a crummy yellow school bus, but a luxury gray line bus pulled into the parking lot. Even after the door opened with a hiss, nobody stepped inside. "Is this for us?" somebody called out to Carlson. He turned and looked back at us. "Time to go, men." So already things are changing. It's not even football season yet. They haven't had a single practice, but Carlson is setting the tone for his expectations for his players, right? And I feel like a lot of schools out there, how do you get to your games? You're on some sort of yellow dog type of older bus. And that's the same thing with these kids at Shills Hole High. And yet their new coach wants them to think about the term respect, right? He wants to show them like what greatness can possibly look like, and gets in this nice bus to go watch the 4A state championship game. Tacoma is 30 minutes from Seattle, but with traffic, the ride took an hour. Nobody much cared. Everybody was laughing and talking loudly, having a good time. The Tacoma Dome holds 20,000 and was about half full. Carlson has a sit at his team on the 50-yard line high above the field. You can see plays develop better from up here. Pick out the guy playing your position and watch him closely. He's who you want to be. The Pasco players raced out of the tunnel first. As they ran, they let out a wild man roar that grew louder and louder until it exploded into the word Bulldogs. After that came crazy howling as they crammed into an ever-narrowing circle and jumped all over one another. A minute or two later, the Rogers players rushed onto the field. The noise that the Pasco fans had let loose worked like a challenge to the Rogers side. They stood and hollered louder and louder. So it looks like this championship game is between two teams, right? Rogers and Pasco. Pasco's warm-up routine was good, but Rogers was amazing. Their coach blew his whistle, and immediately the players rushed towards the goal line, formed a perfect circle with the captains in the middle, and started doing jumping jacks, sit-ups, push-ups. Next came another whistle, and within seconds they had broken up into different subgroups, and each subgroup had a coach directing it. At the 10-yard line, two sets of linemen charged each other as a running back practiced hitting the holes. At the 30, the quarterbacks took turns throwing to receivers. Along the sidelines, the punter kicked to the return men. By the end zone, the place kicker practiced field goals. A horn sounded and both teams lined up at midfield. As the stadium announcer called out the name of each player, people cheered, but when the stars were announced, the roar would go up a dozen decibels. After the introductions came the Star-Spangled Banner, and then finally the kickoff. All through the first half, I wasn't quite sure what I was watching. It was supposed to be a game between the two best teams in the state, but Rogers seemed mediocre. They had only a handful of plays, and they ran them from the same formation: two backs, a wideout, and a receiver in the slot. Sometimes they'd send their fullback right up the middle. Sometimes they'd run off tackle with the halfback. Sometimes the slot receiver, coming in motion just before the ball was snapped, would take a handoff from the quarterback and go wide. They were incredibly crisp, just as you'd expect after watching their warm-ups, but the whole offense was simple. On most of their possessions, Rogers made a first down or two, and then Pasco would stop them and they'd punt. They did have a great special teams. Time after time, their punter would pound the ball down the field, and the cover team would pin Pasco deep in their own territory. But it didn't look as though Rogers could ever score. When Pasco had the ball, the game kicked into high gear. Leander was like the Cheshire Cat. Now you see him, now you don't. Their quarterback didn't throw much, but when he did, he rifled the ball to his two wide receivers, both of whom had great hands. Pasco pushed Rogers around as if they were a JV team. Or at least Pasco pushed them around until they got inside the 20-yard line. But once they reached the red zone, something always seemed to go wrong. On the first drive, it was a penalty for a block in the back. On the next, Leander was hit so hard he coughed up the ball. On another, there was an interception in the end zone. Pasco outgained Rogers 4-1, but it wasn't until just before halftime that they finally pushed the ball into the end zone on the fourth, an inches play, and even then, no one was really sure Leander made it. So this game does not go as the boys expected, right? They expected a lot of like explosive offense plays, right? Maybe it be like a decent scoring game, but it's not. And so if you go back and look at these pages, what kind of game is Rogers playing here? What is their strategy against Pasco?